Hey there, this is Matt with State of Flux, here with a review for a trilogy of films. I'm going to talk to you about the Guillermo del Toro Criterion Collection trilogy. This includes the films Cronos, The Devil's Backbone, and Pan's Labyrinth. Now, if you don't own Guillermo del Toro's trilogy, it's something that I think is worth checking out, even though I have somewhat mixed feelings about the three films, which prompted me to want to talk about them. So, I'm just going to go into them. I'd seen all of these films one time before, so this is my second viewing for each. And it's been quite a long time since watching all of them. Let's start with, in first place, Cronos. This is the first film of Guillermo del Toro. And as far as first film goes, it shows. This is pretty weak sauce by comparison of the rest of his entire library. And I think inarguably probably his worst movie. That said, it does have a really thick and interesting mythology, and you can see the bones of what would develop into a strong filmmaker from that aspect of it. He had the narrative ideas down to create a rich mythology around things that are deeply engaging. However, this film lacks any kind of atmosphere whatsoever. It falls flat because of that. And were it not for Ron Perlman's inclusion in this film, I don't think it would be watchable. It is kind of that bad. That said, Ron Perlman has a strong and motivated performance all the way through that does elevate this film into the watchably bad category, but it's not a particularly good film. That said, this film, even in his first outing, offers one moment of extreme gruesome violence that he seems to include in every single one of his films. Even his PG-13 stuff usually has one grimdark moment that is you're shook by what you just saw. And this happens in this film. In Cronos, you have your sort of vampire-ish character reach in under his skin, and you see it moving his innards around. And it's just oh my god, and it's done so casually in all of his films, this moment of immense violence, that I have to prepare myself whenever I watch a Guillermo movie to know that there's at least one of those moments coming. And I'd kind of forgotten that it had happened in this one, and so he got me again, guys. But yeah, and as far as creating a new mythology for vampire, or a sort of vampire adjacent kind of thing, this was interesting. As I say, this would be one that would be kind of neat if he one day decided to retire by remaking Cronos, taking with him all that he has learned in his filmmaking techniques and how he's grown to become a considerably better writer. I think that would be really neat if his first and last film were the same movie, just one was made by a filmmaker at the start of his career and one made at the end of the journey. That would be really cool. I don't know that that will ever happen, but since there is a lot of the inner workings of clocks and clock-like mechanisms, I think that would be kind of neat too. It's a nice similarity that you can draw. Anyway, enough about Cronos. Moving on to The Devil's Backbone. This, I believe, was Guillermo's third film. In between, he made Mimic, which came with it all the problems of any Weinstein production of the late 90s, or really beyond that. And that film, Mimic had moments that are Guillermo-y, but it still didn't really quite feel like one of his films. This film here, The Devil's Backbone, truly feels like the first honest Guillermo del Toro movie. It has all the hallmarks of it, the coupling of a time and a place, a mythology, a spookiness, without making a genuinely scary movie. He makes an unnerving movie that is just rich in an atmosphere of unease. set against the backdrop of a true historical event, and how the two kind of weave together. All of these things are apparent in almost all of Guillermo's movies moving forward. And that's something that I love about him as a filmmaker. There's some incredibly striking visuals in this that he is able to capitalize on now that he has a couple movies under his belt. Really, what this film feels like to me is this is Guillermo del Toro's Jaws. Jaws was also not Steven Spielberg's first movie, but it's the first movie of his that feels like a Spielberg movie, if you know what I'm saying. Prior to that, he'd done Sugarland Express and Duel, and both of those, like Sugarland Express, he capitalized on how to work with actors, and with Duel, he capitalized on how to technically make a really strong adventure film. And through the marrying of the two, you got an excellent character work with great human moments tethered to a really great horror adventure film in Jaws. And that's kind of how this film feels. This film feels like he took what he'd learned in the two previous films, married them, and released The Devil's Backbone, which is a wonderful sister film or companion piece to Pan's Labyrinth, which I think is, to the point of its release, his best film that he had made. I do think he's made a couple films better than Pan's Labyrinth since then, and I have cooled a little bit on Pan's Labyrinth than I had originally remembered liking for the film. That said, I do think it is a genuinely fantastic movie from front to back. Especially all the fantasy elements of the film, I think, are some of the strongest fantasy elements that we have seen on the big screen. It has a unique visual style that is so plainly Guillermo. It has strong, nourishing, narrative that kind of uses the fantasy to contextualize the reality of that historical time period, while also using the historical time period to nurture that fantasy. And it's a great blend of the two. I will say, of the two, I prefer watching the fantasy elements within that film, and whenever it does come back to the real world, I don't necessarily check out, but I'm not 100% engaged anymore, and that's probably by design. That said, that film has an ugliness to it, an angriness to it, that I think is somewhat exploitative with its use of violence. And I'm not one to really harp on violence in cinema, but there are moments in that film, and that film is so grounded in the human nature of it all, that it feels like we're exploiting the use of violence just to show us really great violence work that was similar to how you were seeing a lot of violence depicted at the time in those 2000s. This is the time of the torture porn. And specifically speaking to the man who's getting his legs sawed off, feels very evocative of those Saw movies. And did we really need to see the saw going into that guy? I don't know that we did. Did we really need to see how many times that bottle is bashed into the dude's nose until his face is completely gone? Probably not. And I think a more mature filmmaker that he is now probably would have trimmed some of that back. Yet, this is still a filmmaker that will make profoundly violent moments happen on screen in all of his films that are just shocking and not a bad representation of our true, honest world. And I think that's why he includes these moments of shocking gruesomeness. However, I think with Pan's Labyrinth, he almost celebrates it a little too much. I know it's coming from the villainous characters, but that's why I say it's exploitative. That said, all of these films, I think, have merit, and I think two of these films are fantastic. I really like Devil's Backbone upon rewatch. I think I like that one a touch more than Pan's Labyrinth, but Pan's Labyrinth is just so unique and so interesting. And I had the pleasure of seeing that one on the big screen back when it first came out. And weirdly enough, like I saw it when it was right after it was nominated for Best International Film, prior to the Oscars, and I saw on the same day Bridge to Terabithia, and it struck me on that day how grim both of those movies are, but Bridge to Terabithia is kind of like PG or kid-friendly Pan's Labyrinth. They both are telling the same story in a weird way, and using real world and fantasy and the tethering of those things in kind of unique and interesting ways that are so similar. And those two also make like interesting companion piece films. But I digress. I give Cronos 2 stars, I give Devil's Backbone 3.5 stars, and I give Pan's Labyrinth also 3.5 stars. Very good movies, and the Criterion Collection versions of them are just very good. Good looking pictures. And there's some really interesting supplementary material. It's harder to find now, but if you can, and have the monies to spend on it, it's worth it. Check it out. Thanks for watching, like, subscribe, do all that good stuff, and peace.